Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast, The Joyful Frugalista, and now here's your host, Serena Bird.
Hello, I'm super excited to share the good news that I have written another book, How to Pay Your Mortgage Off in 10 Years, responds to the cost of living crisis that many people find themselves in. Whether you are paying off a mortgage, you've paid off a mortgage, you aspire to buy a house and have a mortgage, or you know someone who does have a mortgage, this book will have lots of frugal tips and tricks as well as some finance hacks for you. Thank you so much. Yuma Frugalistas, and welcome. Today I have a special guest, and of course all of my guests are special. Today we are going to talk about investing, and also we're going to talk about a brand new book that you are definitely going to have to buy. But first, I have a favour to ask of you. If you enjoy this podcast and find it useful for you, please pay it forward by sharing with a friend. And even better, please follow this podcast, The Joyful Frugalista. I love comments as well. Today we are chatting with Natasha Etschmann, who, along with Anna Christina, who has also been on this podcast, is author of a new book, How to Not Work Forever. Tash is a content creator, founder of Tash Invests, and co-host of the Get Rich Slow Club podcast with Anna Christina. She is quite active on social media, and I think that's a bit of an understatement because she has 109,000 followers on Instagram and over 40,000 on TikTok. Any other platforms, Tash, I haven't mentioned?
No, mostly just Instagram and TikTok. But TikTok's at 120, which is exciting.
Wow, so I got that figure wrong. So there you go. She's pretty active. So welcome, Tash.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. So new book, and it's all about investing. Let's go back to the beginning. How did you get interested and started in investing?
A bit further back from that, before investing, when I grew up, my parents just very openly spoke about money. So when I was really young, they gave us pocket money. They kind of involved us in adult conversations. I remember my dad tried to explain what shares were using a tomato sauce bottle. I think I was like 10, maybe a little bit younger. And he was like, you have the sauce bottle and you can buy 1/10 of it and your friends can have the other 10ths of it. And back then I was like, what? Why would you want to buy 1/10 of a tomato sauce bottle? That kind of stuck with me, and later on it clicked, it made sense. But they would discuss things like pay rises, their mortgages. We would budget for family holidays together. I remember wanting Foxtel because my friends had Foxtel, but they were like, if you have Foxtel, then we can't go on this holiday, for example. So I remember just being very involved in everything from such a young age. And then when I got a bit older, I kind of just knew investing was something that you had to do. And that's how you kind of made money and grew your wealth. And I was really interested in working in healthcare. So I didn't really want to work in like tech or mining or start a business back then. I just wanted to work in healthcare in some way. So I knew that I had to invest as well. And then my parents were just really open about it. So dad helped me open my first investment account. He told me to buy an ETF and it all went from there.
Wow. So you've had lots of guidance from a young age. Did you get the tomato sauce kind of references, and were you upset about not getting Foxtel?
I didn't really understand the tomato sauce thing. I think I heard dad and his friends talking about shares. So I was like, well, what's a share? I don't get it. But back then I was like, well, that's dumb. Like, why would you want 1/10 of a tomato sauce bottle? Like, you can't cut a tomato sauce thing in half. So it didn't make sense back then, but it really stuck with me until later when I understood it. And Foxtel, no, like I remember being annoyed, but also like I kind of got it as well. Like I was like, oh, we get to do these other things that people don't get to do either. So I kind of saw it from more of like the logical perspective. Like money hasn't really quite been that emotional for me. It's kind of just been a logical math. Like my dad works as an engineer, so he does everything in spreadsheets and everything has like a pros and cons, and he has like decision matrices. So it's all just very like a logical number, and it made sense.
A whole project plan for the family budget.
Mm-hmm. Even just decisions like deciding whether or not to study OT or physio or some other stuff at uni. Dad put like numbers and weightings against things like job prospects and income and how much would I enjoy it and stuff like that. So we got like a physical number for what I should study at uni. So everything was very math based.
Did that help you, or are you more intuitive based?
A bit of both. Like now I'm more intuitive, but back then I was like, yeah, sure. I picked OT because that got the highest value score. I didn't know all the options back then. I didn't know I could do a podcast or work in finance or that kind of stuff back then. So things changed, but I think it worked out really well.
Well, I'm so glad. And actually, I really like the analogy of the family holiday because they're the sort of discussions we have at home. Last year, actually, my kids virtually got almost nothing for Christmas. Well, they did and they didn't. I gave them a small meteor rock because I felt bad about them not having something to unwrap. But we had a family holiday to the Gold Coast planned. I have family who lives on the Gold Coast. and we hadn't been up to holiday with my mum and my sister for about 7 years. So we had a big driving trip from Canberra to the Gold Coast, and as part of that,
wow.
they went to the theme parks. And the theme parks was their present, their main present.
Mm.
But I did feel a little bit scroogey because my nephew who lives on the Gold Coast, like he already had that, and then he had other Christmas presents. But when I spoke to them recently, they said actually it was so cool. They had so much fun. It was the best Christmas ever.
That's amazing. Yeah, my parents kind of did something similar where they would print something out and you could unwrap like the gift voucher or the printout of something that was happening. So you still felt like it was a surprise, but it was something happening later. And I think like a really underrated thing that I had was we grew up overseas where you couldn't really buy a lot of stuff. So we would come back to Australia like once or twice a year to stock up on clothes or other things. And mum would give us budgets and tell us what we had to buy. So to be like, you need a few pairs of shorts, a few tops, a jumper, something like that. And we'd have to go and shop within our budget to get that stuff. So I think back then that really taught me how to delay gratification because you just didn't have anywhere to spend your money. And then we also knew what our budget was when we did go shopping. But all those experiences really add up when you're a kid.
I think so. And where did you live?
We lived in Papua New Guinea for a little bit. So that was like when I remember the most. But before that, we also lived in Thailand and Ghana as well.
Yeah, I know. I have friends who are on posting to places, particularly in the Pacific, and they do come back to Australia for shopping trips. And that's not just David Jones. It's actually a lot of essential items that we take for granted.
Yeah, I used to come back for like the dentist appointments as well. So it'd be a big trip, but I'd be like, yay, shopping, but also like, oh no, the dentist and the doctor and all of that stuff.
Yeah, all the essentials. So back to investing. What was the kind of light bulb moment or the time when you went, right, okay, I've got the tomato sauce analogy now. I really want to get into this.
I kind of just been Googling it for ages, but it was really hard to find information like back then. So I started investing when I was 18 and I'm 26 now. But back then there wasn't really a whole lot of Australian specific information. When I Googled things, it was stuff like Roth IRA from the US or US brokerage accounts. And it was really hard to find Australian ETFs to invest in. And I also didn't quite get it. Like I had quite a long time where I was like, if this is as good as it seems, why is everyone not doing it? Like there must be a catch and there must be something that I'm missing. So it took me like a solid year of just reading stuff and Googling and looking for information before I was like, okay, I'll just do it and buy it. And the trigger was probably just dad being like, this is a good ETF. It was IVV back then, so the S&P 500 ETF. Just buy it on like ANZ because that was my bank account at the time. So I just did that. And it took me like a few years after that to get really comfortable investing still because I still didn't quite get why everyone wasn't doing it. And I was just waiting for everything to crash under me. But that didn't happen and it ended up being quite good.
Well, there's still a lot of people, despite the good information you're providing, who are not doing it. So like why? Like what are the sorts of reasons that people often give for not investing?
Oh my God, there's so many. There's all the misconceptions we have, like investing is really hard. Like it doesn't have to be that hard, that you need a finance degree and like 5 different monitors and a fancy suit to invest. Like that's not the case at all. That you need to do a lot of research.
Even worse than that, people who do all of those research often overthink it. It's like, I've met people who've worked in those kind of investing areas and they invest other people's money, but they don't actually do it themselves.
Yeah, and like long term, a lot of the stats show that passive investing wins out over active management anyway. But yeah, like they're all really common reasons. Or thinking you need a lot of money as well when you don't really. You can start with $5 these days. I think people think it's riskier than it is because investing's all kind of lumped into one bucket where it's like the penny stocks, the random mining companies, but also the index funds when they're all completely different investments.
And in your latest book, and I won't spoil it by asking you to give the stats because firstly, you probably can't remember off the top of your head. And secondly, people really do need to buy your book. But you do give some statistics on the odds of actually winning things like the Powerball and the Lotto or even a scratchy ticket. And they're not good.
No, it's like 1 in a couple of million. I think the Powerball is like 1 in 130 million from memory. Like that is massive. That's huge. Like that's not going to happen anytime soon. And I think we really overestimate our chances of winning because 130 million is just a massive number. Like you can't really conceptualize that. Like we don't have 130 million of anything in our lives. So that's really hard. Versus like investing, it's like, oh, I don't know. Like it's not the payoff isn't quite worth it there. So I won't bother.
Well, I guess it doesn't seem as fun, does it? Like because special numbers that psychically you choose that are going to give you your multi-million-dollar payout.
Yeah.
But actually, I was chatting with my in-laws on the weekend and it turns out that many years ago, they actually did win $30,000, I think it was, on the Lotto. And the funny thing about this is that they never told anyone. They never told their kids. They just kind of I think, did they put it in their house? I'm looking at hubby.
We went on holiday.
They went on a holiday.
Cruise.
They went on a
Amazing.
cruise. They didn't
Did they
tell
say
anyone.
why they didn't tell anyone?
I think they're just very kind of shy people, but I think they're probably also conscious that if you start kind of bragging about this, people will genuinely ask you for money, probably.
Definitely a lot of stigma around having money, especially if it's not common in your circle as well. Like I found from posting online that telling people I have some money or that I invest can be very triggering for a lot of people. So it's definitely interesting when people do win the lotto or something like that happens.
Yeah, that whole triggering thing, it's a big one because I think sometimes you do need a safe space to talk about when things are working for you. But I hear you. I remember during COVID sharing that we'd paid off the mortgage and someone was very upset about that.
Yeah, well, you read a whole book about paying off your mortgage, didn't you? That's one of yours.
I did, indeed.
Yes. Yeah, that must be. Do you get comments like that very often?
Sometimes. I think it's like people just sort of don't understand or they don't think it's real.
Yeah.
But yeah, with this cost of living crisis, some people get really kind of a bit funny about it. This kind of, oh, it's fine for you, you're wealthy kind of thing. Not so much anymore, but that was one that really did surprise me. And I think it made me realise that, look, there are just so many people who are really hurting over finances who aren't necessarily talking about it. And then something like that happens and they get very confronted.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
you must experience it a lot more than me, I'm sure.
Yes, yeah, I think it can be very triggering for people because I am quite young and I sometimes make fun videos where I'm, I don't know, going to the beach or going on holiday and then I'll say I was sharing net worth updates for a while. That's kind of how I grew on social media initially. And that can be very triggering for a lot of people, especially because I'm from Perth. So everyone was like, oh, we don't believe you that you bought an apartment for that amount of money. Like my apartment was $295,000. And just so many comments like that where people are trying to pick apart how you couldn't have done something instead of focusing on how you could have done it. So stuff like, oh, your parents give you all of your money. There's lots of quite sexist comments as well. Like everyone's Googling my dad and finding him on LinkedIn and trying to prove that he's paid for everything that I've gotten, stuff like that, which is wild. Or just like, oh, you went to private school and that's why. And like there is a place to acknowledge privilege and say, yes, all of those things definitely helped me. My parents spoke about money. I went to a private school. I lived at home until I was 22. Like that's amazing. But there's also a point where it's not helpful as well to tear someone apart and just be like, oh, that's cool. I'll take what that from I can and then I will go and make my own situation better.
Wow. And look, disclosure here, I did actually have a brief look at your Instagram and saw some of those comments, particularly around inheritance and other things. And I was like, you know, it's so easy to do that rather than sort of go, well, let's just stay in my own lane and look at my own finances.
And like I love seeing what other people are doing because if your family aren't talking about it, like most people's families don't, if your friends don't talk about it, if you don't learn about it at school, then where are you going to find out this information? So I think talking about it can be great. But yeah, we just have to try and not take it so personally when someone is doing something different or better than us and just be like, oh, that's cool. Like that's a cool idea with the savings account. Well, that's a cool idea with that ETF. I'm going to go and research that now.
Well, thank you for being so honest and also kudos to you for being so calm about it because I don't know that I would necessarily.
Oh, it's taken years.
You've got lots of experience. So we were talking before about my mortgage book and obviously that's focused on debt, the big, compound interest, snowball growing. So what do you advise people do when they're paying down debt and then suddenly they also want to start investing?
It really depends on the type of debt. Like obviously, if you've got a mortgage, it's very different to having a credit card or a personal loan or a car loan. So it's first to look at what debts they have and list the interest rates and the repayment terms as well. Often people say to completely pay off debt before you start investing, but I think there is a bit of merit to maybe starting to invest little amounts because it can be really hard to go from paying $1,000 a month into a personal loan, for example, and then all of a sudden having $1,000 a month to invest. Like that's really scary. So I've got some people I know that invest like $5 a week while they're paying off debt because they're just trying to learn how to invest. So when the debt is gone, they're completely ready to invest. But if you're just looking at like the spreadsheet answer, it's definitely pay off the high interest debt first and then invest. With your mortgage, it's a bit tricky. Like at the moment, I have a fixed loan still. I'm very lucky for that.
Oh, goodness. Yes, that is very lucky.
Yeah, it's at 2.6 until next year, which is awesome. So I invest all of my surplus money. But with a mortgage that's around like 6% or higher, that can be a harder decision to make for sure.
Yeah, most definitely. And it's something we struggle with as well. Like during the big COVID crash, I kind of wished we'd taken more money out of the mortgage and invested then, to be honest. And at the time, our thinking was very much around paying off the mortgage and also I just quit full-time work. So I was feeling a little bit like not taking risks at that point. But certainly when you look at how and we did invest a little bit, but we really could have done more. But that's it. Like, you don't know sometimes. So often the psychological aspect of investing is so important.
Yeah, well, like I was just saying, there's the spreadsheet answer. You're like, this is the mathematical probability and this is what I should do. But then it's how you feel as well. Like, do you want to have a mortgage? Do you want to feel stress-free? Like, that's huge. And that value is so much more than maybe making a few more thousand on your investments. But it can be quite hard to balance them. So if people aren't sure, I kind of just say, we'll do both until you decide. Like, you don't have to completely pay off your mortgage or completely invest. You can do a bit of both at the same time.
Good answer. And you speak a lot about ETFs. In fact, you spoke earlier about your dad and getting you into ETFs, which is kind of a bit ahead of the curve, because I suspect he was doing that at a period of time where a lot of people still didn't know what they are. In fact, a lot of people still don't know what they are. Do you get people asking you if they're FPOS or how they are?
Yes, EFTs. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's like lots of language that's meant to confuse people in the investing world. And ETF is just an exchange traded fund, which is a basket of shares pretty much. I like to explain it like a favorites box. So instead of buying just the cherry ripe or just the flake, you instead buy the whole favorites box and you get everything inside, which is awesome. Funny thing about my dad telling me to invest in ETFs, he knew they were good, but he didn't actually buy them himself because he likes to do more risky things. He was like, go do this, but I'm going to go risk my money elsewhere.
How did his risky stuff compare to your diversified ETFs?
Yeah, mine's done better. Definitely. He's decided now he just invests into super, so he can't fiddle with it as much. He was very like more of the gambling type, like, oh, this is exciting. Whereas my mum is doesn't like to take risks. So that's been quite interesting to see them navigate those conversations as well and seeing two completely opposite people.
Yeah, the compromise in terms of relationships. So do you have those same sort of conversations at home as well in terms of how to invest, or are you more on the same wavelength with your partner?
We have our separate investments completely. So we kind of do our own things in that regard, but we kind of think similar. Like, he has a slightly different investing philosophy to me and he's focusing on his business more at the moment, whereas I continuously invest in ETFs. But it is very similar still. Sometimes we'll have little things where I'll be, I don't know, more excited about spending money on something else. And obviously that's a conversation, but because our finances are still very separate, we can both kind of do what we want.
So my husband Neil hadn't really done any investing really before I met him. He had a sheep farm years ago, which in the end...
A sheep farm
would have done well had they kept it, but they sold it at a time when wool prices were still fairly low. But no, hadn't really. So it was kind of a slow... Well, I wouldn't say a slow process, but I think it's often you've got to build that trust. Like, you're in a new relationship and suddenly you're like, let's invest big monies in this thing you've never heard of. It's kind of...
A sheep farm is hard as well. It's not something you know too much about.
He doesn't have the sheep farm anymore. It was quite some time ago, although whenever we're having conversations with someone about wool or farming, he certainly has an opinion, which is handy. But it does take a while, I think, in a relationship to build that trust and get those common goals. Sometimes it's slowly.
Yeah, definitely. I think I have a bit of an advantage with that because my stuff is very public. So people already know pretty well what I believe and think about money beforehand. But I've definitely had like exes in the past where they've not wanted to invest at all. And that really doesn't align with what I believe about the world and what you need to succeed. So like long term, those things weren't going to work out. But yeah, it's a big conversation to have, definitely.
Most definitely. So in terms of your strategy, what kind of things do you advise people to invest in? And actually, I probably should stop here and say, before we even talk about this, you actually are now authorised to talk a little bit more about your investing publicly. So maybe let's start talking about that and then talk about the strategies.
Yeah, I got licensed to give general financial product advice. Gosh, it was like a year and a half ago now, back when ASIC kind of announced that we were doing things wrong as people on the internet. So I got licensed and now I can give general advice. So I can talk about the pros and cons of things and my opinion on stuff, but I can't give personal advice and tell people exactly what to do.
And was that a difficult process?
Yes, because there's no information on it. Like, everyone says, I'll just go and get licensed, but I'm not a financial advisor and I don't have a finance degree at the moment either. So it wasn't like you just log on and you apply for something and you pay the fee. You had to negotiate with companies to want to license you. And it's just people can charge whatever they want for that stuff. So it's lots of like private negotiations going on to find someone who will license you to do the things that you want to do. And people all interpret the law differently as well. Like, it's not very specific. So it was hard to find someone who would want to license me to do exactly what I wanted to do, because obviously social media is quite a huge risk to some companies. But yeah, it took about 6 months and then I had to do a few courses and then I got licensed.
Well, congratulations. And there's a real
Thank you.
need, as you know, for common sense, unbiased advice on general investing strategies. And that's the risk that we miss those.
Definitely, especially when we're seeing all this stuff from people in the US, for example, but no one in Australia giving that Australian context.
And so when you do talk about investing strategies publicly, what are the sorts of things you recommend people look at?
Well, obviously, it depends on someone's situation, and it depends on your time frame as well. So if someone only wants to save or invest for a few years, then maybe just a savings account is the right answer for that, unless their goal timeline is flexible. But for longer term investing, I definitely speak about buying and holding long-term ETFs that track an index. So for example, the S&P 500 or the ASX 200, or looking into a diversified ETF. So either BDHG is a really popular one from Vanguard, or from BetaShares, they've got DHHF, which is their all growth fund. So looking into one of those if you want to get started as well. But I also recommend just doing the research too, like deciding on your goals, your timeline, how long you actually, being really clear on how long you want to invest for, and just starting small so you're comfortable with it as well. Because it's really hard to put money in and be comfortable with it if you haven't experienced it for a few years beforehand.
All excellent advice. So for people who want to know more, I'm sure they can follow you on your many channels to find out more. But that's fairly common sense advice, although it can sound scary the first time you hear something like that.
Yeah, or people think it's boring. They're like, oh, what about crypto? Or what about over leveraging and buying 3 houses? Or what about, I don't know, investing in gold or something like that? But I think the boring long-term strategies that definitely went out.
Well, I think people often hear about these blingy things, and I'm saying blingy deliberately because we are talking about gold and crypto, when the price is high. Of course, gold is really high at the moment, so suddenly you're getting all these posts about, should I invest in gold? When gold prices are low, you never hear about it. And
that's with everything.
It was like with everything. And there was a surge, I think, about 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago, where everyone was talking about crypto. And I kept getting media inquiries about investing in crypto. And we sat down, my husband and I, and thought about it, and it didn't match our values, particularly in terms of the environmental aspect because of the amount of energy it used. So we made a values-based decision not to. And then all the media inquiries dried up, funnily enough. And then it just went quiet for a while.
Yeah. And then it's come back again all of a sudden.
Funny that.
Yeah. I do buy a little bit of crypto, but it's less than 5% of my overall assets. So I think there is some exciting things happen and some exciting projects and the future might be there, but I'm not trying to gamble too much of my wealth with that. So I keep it very limited.
And I'm assuming that in that context, if you lost that 5%, you're not going to be destitute.
No, it's fine. Yeah, because I've got way more money in shares. I've got an apartment. I've got money in a savings account. So I feel like it's diversified enough that even if that crypto does go to nothing, it's fine.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of important sometimes to have a bit of that play money. My kind of blingy thing I'm interested in is in angel investing, which is very high risk.
Oh, awesome.
So
yes. Yeah. And hard to get into.
Well, actually not hard to get into. I think there's a lot more startups who want the money, but it's because I have a connection with the Canberra Innovation Network and I often get to profile and write about startups, and some are really passionate about doing things to help the environment. So it's kind of investing in startups that I know and like is really rewarding. You know, you're helping to take someone's dream forward and potentially make the world a better place. But is it a good investment? Well, it depends whether they list on the ASX or get bought out and they've got a big exit, but that could be years and years and years and years in the future.
Yeah, and it's that values-based thing that you were saying about as well, picking something that aligns with your values and you're helping build the future as well. It's not all about the spreadsheet money answers.
True, it's not all about the spreadsheet money answers, but since you have talked about spreadsheets, how important is it to track your investments and how can people do that?
Definitely very important. I think you can swing too far the other way and get too obsessed with it. I definitely did that at the start. But I think it's important to keep an eye on what's happening and also just to learn and understand for yourself what's happening as well. I think with the media, we can get really terrified by being oh my God, the stock market's dropped overnight. It's the end of the world. But if you track your own investments, you can see over the long term yourself what's actually happening. I just use ShareSite. You can also use something called Navexa. They're both share tracking softwares. You can link them to your brokerage account and they just give you all of the information. So you can see your capital growth, which is awesome, but also your dividends and the currency change as well. So we kind of only focus on either capital growth or dividends. It's rare that people put them all together to look at the total return or the total picture of their investments, because sometimes the capital growth isn't doing well, but you'll be getting quite a bit in dividends, or the other way around, but you'll just get the capital growth but not be receiving any income from it. So ShareSite's really great at giving you that whole picture.
That's really, really handy, and thank you for that. And 2 weekends ago, or a few weekends ago, I was down at Queenscliff for this Fire Spark retreat, which I think I've mentioned, which is the first ever financial independence retire early retreat in Australia. And we had a robust discussion there about comparing apples with apples and apples with oranges. Specifically, I shared a chart tracking how Vanguard's VAS, Vanguard Australian Shares, had tracked over the last 10 years. And crucially, that didn't show dividends. And so it's interesting to perhaps look at that side by side with, say, a lot of American shares, like particularly in the really fast growth sectors. Because when you just compare the growth side by side, a lot of the US ones just rocket up, but they typically don't have as good dividend payments. So they're a different product often.
Yeah. And then also in Australia, we have franking credits, which make dividends even more attractive. So that can be amazing for something like VAS, which people often don't consider in their returns either.
So franking credits, this was something that was really controversial a couple of elections ago. What is it, and why does it make Australian dividends so attractive?
Franking credits are a credit to prevent double taxation. So a company pays tax on the profits at their company tax rate of 30%, and then you get the dividends. If we didn't have franking credits, you would also have to pay tax on the dividends, which would mean like that dividend has been taxed twice. So to prevent that, the government created franking credits. So with your dividend, it comes with a credit of tax already paid, which is great. So if your tax rate is 30%, for example, you don't need to pay tax on that dividend at all, which is awesome. If you're retired and you have a low income, you actually get money back because you don't need to pay that tax. And if you're a high income earner, you might just pay like the 12 to 15% extra on top of that, which is amazing because then you're getting like either a cheaper tax-free dividend or getting money back in your retirement, which is so exciting.
Yeah, it is very exciting. And I remember, I think it was Aussie Fire wrote a piece about it because there was a lot of criticism about it. And yeah, it was interesting because I think it was sort of pitched as when it was going through that election phase as this is something to take the money off the rich. And I think they didn't realise how many retirees, particularly older pensioners, were really reliant on this.
Base their whole retirement off those numbers.
Yeah, exactly. And suddenly, like, the whole scenario completely changed for them. And I think it really took people by surprise. They hadn't really thought about this.
Yeah, it's a really important point as well, as we can make all of these plans based on the information we have now, but they can change at any time. Like I know we wanted to talk about super as well. Like super, for example, is you decide something based on the rules now, but that can change in the future. So it's definitely something you have to be wary of. But I think with franking credits, it's so hard to understand. Like it's made very complex. It's not super straightforward. So when people hear like, oh, the rich are not paying tax on this, it's easy to be like, oh, just take it away without understanding that tax has already been paid along the way.
And it's also been really key in terms of incentivising companies to deliver dividends and people to invest in shares.
Yeah, and we all like benefit as well through our super fund too.
Those who have super, which is a good segue to super. So why is super so super? And this is an important conversation to have because a lot of young people don't trust super still.
Yeah, I have found it really hard to get excited about super because it is so far away, and I prefer to have money outside of super because it's mine and I can use it, even though I'm not intending to use it for so long. But especially writing the book, like I've kind of been looking into it more, but with writing the book, it really solidified for me that super is really great because I had to do all the different scenarios and the numbers for the book. And I was like, wow, okay, this is like the best tax hack ever, pretty much. Like you can't ignore super. And I think I listened to a podcast that reframed it for me, where it was like your brokerage account is from now until you retire, and then your super account is from retirement to like the rest of your life. And that's actually quite a solid chunk of time as well. But yeah, the tax benefits are amazing in there.
The tax benefits are huge. I mean, and especially if you can salary sacrifice up to, it's still, I think, $27,500 to get that kind of tax benefits on that amount. It's huge. It makes such a difference for your future self.
And if we're aiming for like a 7% return each year on our investments, but you can go and save 15% on tax, like that's an amazing instant return.
Yeah, it is totally. There are, for some people, it's not as worth it, particularly if they're not on a high tax bracket. But if you're in a full-time job, particularly on a higher bracket, like really maximize your super, understand your super.
Yeah. Or if you're under, is it like 55,000 now? I can't remember the exact number, but if you're a low income earner and you put in $1,000, the government will match that by putting in $500 in super for you.
That's right.
Which is amazing.
The super co-investment scheme, I think. And actually heading...
The co-contribution.
Oh, the co-contribution, thank you. heading up to 30th June, make sure you do that if you haven't already. It's always good to get free money from the government, isn't it?
Yes, definitely.
Get that free money. It's designed to help you in your future. So one final question for you. Do you have a Frugalista tip to share? Is there something that you do that's a bit frugal and interesting to save money?
Yes, I love frequent flyer points. And at the moment, I've been getting into gift cards when they have the bonuses at the supermarket. So last week, I wanted to buy a new iPhone, which can be quite pricey. But I waited a few weeks for gift cards to go on special at Coles because I wanted to get velocity points. So I went to Coles, got $2,000 worth of gift cards, and then went and bought my phone at JB Hi-Fi using those. But with those points, I ended up getting 20,000 velocity points, which is enough for me to fly from Perth to Canberra, which is exciting.
Wow, that is exciting. So $2,000 worth of gift cards. I'm sure the person at the register must have gone, what on earth is happening here?
Yeah, I had to go to 2 different shops because they only let you get 5 at a time. And the first shop only had them in $100 amounts, which is not great. But the other shop had them in $500 amounts. It's a bit of a process. I got a massive receipt, but it's worth it when they have the 20 times bonus points on there because you can get enough for a whole flight from one purchase.
Wow, that is a fantastic hack. I'm really into frequent flyer points as well, so I will definitely be looking out for those types of specials. Thank you so much, Tash, for being on here. I've learnt so much and I really appreciate you taking the time to share your wisdom. And best wishes for your book, How to Not Work Forever, which is out in bookstores on
June 26th. So a little while still, but June 26th it'll be out.
But people can pre-order. And in fact, it's already a number one Amazon bestseller, I think, because of the number of pre-orders. So well done you.
Yes. Yeah, we had our bestseller label for 24 hours. That was fun. We're also offering workshops. I don't know when this podcast is going live, but if you pre-order the book, we've got a few free workshops running. So you can just head to my Instagram for those.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What if we got together?
You've been listening to The Joyful Frugalista with Serena Bird. And of course, sound has been by Neil Hadley.
You could talk, I would listen, I would understand your mind. Oh, I long to be with you, walking toward the sea, and the times when I'm lonely, you could be the one to comfort me every day. I am thankful that our separate paths have crossed. Every night I lay my head down, I know I'll never feel so lost. What if we cross the river? We could start